conversation session now. So this is a sort of set this up kind of like a podcast type interview, because in a way it's a bit more interesting than just watching back-to-back slides. So I just wanted to set the groundwork there for you about kind of what we're doing and what this specific, if you want to take forward community energy in your council, you want to be able to convince lots of different people at different levels of power and responsibility that this is a sensible and appropriate thing to do that can work and that doesn't bring with it a lot of risk. And how better to kind of learn about that from people who've actually done it. So I'm going to introduce to you, and then I'll stop sharing my screen so that you can see them. Ben Burfoot from Reading Borough Council, who's their sustainability manager, and Sarah Grimes from Bath and West Community Energy. So Ben, along with all of the other work that he does as sustainability manager at the council, has managed Reading Borough Council's relationship with Reading Community Energy for many years, and that partnership has resulted in solar installations on multiple buildings, which is culminating now in their biggest project to date, which is just over 200 kilowatts of a community-owned solar array on the bus station, the bus depot, with the council taking on a technically complicated and financially more tight project at the other end of that depot. So it's very much a close partnership working. So Ben's able to speak from the perspective of an officer who's navigated the internal institutional pressures of making that relationship work in practice over years, the procurement, legal and political stuff that comes up that can block or enable progress. And then Sarah, who is the Community Business Development Manager and Deputy MD for Bath and West Community Energy, was previously, for about 13 years, I think, the Corporate Sustainability Officer at Bath and North East Somerset Council. And if I say Baines several times during the interview, I know the council doesn't like it, but it's my shorthand that I can't stop doing. So if I'm saying Baines, I mean Bath and North East Somerset Council. Sarah was part of the council's team there that established their cooperation agreement with Bath and West Community Energy way back in 2011. So that's one of the earliest and most enduring formal council community energy partnerships in the country, possibly the oldest one. She also then held a very similar role at Wiltshire Council for about 3 or 4 years, and then joined Bath and West Community Energy directly. So she's one of the few people in the country who've really seen this in detail from both sides of the equation. And it spans from when Bath and West was a very small organisation to the professional outfit it is now, with 12 megawatts of installed capacity and a community benefit fund of its own, which it distributes locally. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my slides and introduce, and obviously, as I said at the beginning, go ahead and drop questions into the chat. I can't see them, but Kirsty and Asma will be sort of sorting them as we go. So if you want to go, I don't know how it looks to everyone else, but Kirsty, if you want to go ahead and pin Sarah and Ben so that everyone else can see them. Let's set the scene. Let's start with Sarah, and then to Ben. Do you want to each give us a few brief sentences just as a picture to highlight the council community energy relationship in your area, where it is now, and roughly how long it took you to get there, that kind of period of growth?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, so we are still working really actively with Bath and North East Somerset Council, so that partnership continues to sort of evolve and deepen, which is great. The moment we are working on, particularly my area of work actually at the moment is more focused on the retrofit side. So we are working with them on a big partnership around historic buildings. So working directly with the planning department there. So conservation officers at the moment, a conservation officer goes out with one of our energy assessors to people's homes and gives planning advice at the same time as we do energy advice. So that's one of the projects we're working on. We're also running a community energy network together, which is a joint funding from the National Lottery. And that's in addition to all the solar arrays we've got on council assets, particularly school roofs. So Council Baines decided to do its own assets on its own operational estate, but it was from a very early stage helping us to put solar on schools, which was great in one council building. They've also, as we'll get to, they have invested directly in some of our projects, which has been great. We've been exploring for a number of years sort of virtual power purchase agreements due to energy crisis and whatnot. That hasn't come to fruition yet, as well as joint ventures, which we're going to be looking to accelerate given the local power plan. Yeah, but it's a very varied way, different ways of working. Once we've got that initial foundation of trust, I think it is then possible to explore different ways where we can act as a delivery partner, but one that's completely aligned on policy aims of the council. In terms of we're non-profit, we want the same thing, we're not going anywhere.
Right.
So yeah, it's quite
Yeah,
wide and varied, our
totally
relationship.
embedded, not a
Yeah.
sort of fly-by-night outfit. Brilliant, thank
That's
you.
right.
And Ben, similarly for you, a sort of brief potted history of the relationship of Reading Council and Reading Community Energy Society. Ooh, we lost Ben.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. So in Reading, we've had an active community of people interested in community energy for a long time, since longer than I've been here, which is quite a number of years. And so I guess the story started back in 2016. We'd been having conversations with the community about possibility of a hydro in the River Thames and all sorts of exciting things like that. I guess my initial energy and thought was around getting a solar-based program up and running. The council had been busy installing solar panels under the feed-in tariff for a few years by that point, and we'd managed to install some 50 or so arrays on different buildings, 16 schools and a whole load of council buildings. And then we had done a follow-up project installing onto council house roofs for 500 council houses. And then after that, we realised that the future was going to be about community energy, and the government, I guess, gave us a bit of a booster of an incentive by saying we're stopping the feed-in tariffs for everyone except for community energy, where we're going to give them another year. So we thought, right, okay, we'll hand over all the projects we've got in the pipeline to a new community energy organisation. So we established. Well, we were working with some volunteers at the time to establish Reading Community Energy Society. We got together with Energy for All to help sort of structure the organisation and get the legals in place for that organisation. A number of directors were brought together and joined the organisation, have to become members. So they had shareholdings in the organisation, of course, and the council became one of those. So we bought shares and we put a councillor on the board, and we had another councillor join the board in order to represent the community in terms of the rules of the cooperative allowed us to have an additional member there as well. So we've still got two members of the council on the board, Reading Community Energy Society. We are the society is in the process of actually moving away from Energy for All, but that's another story. We are installing the latest installers on the bus depot, and I guess like most organisations, we had Community Energy Society had a bit of a lull when the feed-in tariff finished and when there was no more subsidy, and then you had to make the project stack up in their own right. So larger roofs were possible though, so that was the upside. And the latest one is the Reading bus depot, and that project will happen alongside some additional solar being installed by the council, and also obviously we're going through that transition that many councils and bus companies are, which is this electrification of the buses. So 50 or so buses now in place, electric buses in place, and all of the HV install and everything that has to go alongside that. So there's lots going on that site.
Yeah.
But the solar being decking out the entire depot roof is a great step forward, and we think will be the biggest solar array in Reading.
It's quite an evolution from where you started in the end of the feed-in tariff.
And that period of time I just described is around 10 years. So 2016, Reading Community Energy Society started.
Yeah. So for those councils on the call who are sort of like, this all feels a bit new, it's really useful to hear both that, but also, I guess my next question for Sarah would be, yours goes back even further, the relationship, that cooperation agreement, which I don't know how unique that still is in England, but I've always found that to be quite a unique thing, where there was a sort of memorandum of understanding from very early days, signed in 2011, which I think is possibly even the same year that Bath and West Community Energy was set up. So I can't remember if you were at the council then, but it's a very early and quite formal commitment from the council. What do you think made it possible to formalize that relationship so early? Like, what did the council need to see or know before it was willing to put its name on the line, or did it come right down to a particular individual, a particular politician that just said, make this happen? Like, what's the genesis of this unusual thing?
Yeah,
Yes.
so this is,
Sorry.
Sorry, let's take that from Sarah and then I'll come back to you then. Sorry.
thanks. Yeah, it's I think your list is a pretty good summary of what Bath and West Community Energy needed to show to the council. The list that you just showed up in terms of so thumbs up to that. So we had so part of it, because it was very early, there were a number of set circumstances that aren't the case now. In fact, we're in a better position in many ways now. For those starting feeling like, oh my goodness, I don't have all these things. I don't think you necessarily need them now. I should caveat first by saying that. So what we did have was we had a very experienced person who came in with a community energy hat on. That's Peter Capener. He had previously been involved in setting up the Centre for Sustainable Energy. So he had really good, strong skills, both in terms of just the technical expertise, commercial expertise. He also just knew how to, I think personality-wise, he knew how to talk to councils. So this is one thing we've often found, is that when I was working at the council, is oftentimes community groups come to you with a little bit of a campaigning sort of hat on. They're saying, why aren't you doing this? And they get grumpy because the council doesn't move very quickly or whatever. And that tends to be very hard then for us to work in that collaborative way with. Whereas Pete Capener, my current manager, MD of Bath and West Community Energy, came in very much understanding, as you've said, that class of cultures. He really bridged that beautifully. Right. So it's partly due to him coming as a very trustworthy partner for the council to work with on all those levels, on all those categories that you had in your list. It is also, I think, the personality of my manager, the sustainability manager, Jane Wildblood, who had come from a campaigning background, and she understood really keenly the need to have that kind of political support. And so she always made sure to have a cross-party sort of steering group around climate change. Wherever it's sat in the council, it obviously gets moved around, doesn't it, these teams? And she was always made sure to have that strong. And she was always very good at pitching the climate agenda and community energy to whatever that political stripe was at that time. So if it was about big society, it's like, well, here we go, big society. If it was about community wellbeing, yep, here you go. Here's it. The community fund will be another stream of income for these groups that the council supports, but doesn't always have money for, such as share and repair or community hubs. And so she was very savvy in terms of that. And then I think the third essential piece of the puzzle really was actually a very enlightened legal manager at the time. So although it said it was an early agreement at Bath and West and Baines, it didn't, and it happened quickly. It didn't feel quick at the time. Yes, I was there at the time of it being developed, and boy, it went round and round with the legal department trying to get their head around this new way of working that enables us to not have to go through procurement. I saw a question coming in. It's like, okay, if we're going to work with community energy, we have to go out to tender. We don't, because of this community cooperation agreement. But that was a massive shift for the council. It hadn't worked that way before. And so we were getting all into the what's and the wherefores and all the risks and so forth. And then this very enlightened legal manager just said, actually, you don't need to get into the practicalities here. We as a council have the statutory right underneath, first of all, the Localism Act and then the Wellbeing Act, to work with any organisation, work preferentially, which means not procurement, with an organisation that will serve our policy objectives and is really aligned with us. And so on that basis, because at that point in time, there were, at the feed-in tariff, and you'll remember this, there were lots of commercial operators offering roof rental schemes as well, on different rates to what we were. And so we needed to be able to say, well, this is actually why we're going to go with Bath and West Community Energy and let them do our school roofs instead of letting these other commercial operators do it, because we have the power to do so, under statute, basically. So she saw that, and actually the agreement itself is very simple, and it can really be copied and pasted by anyone who wants to use it. And it just establishes that principle that doesn't get into the specifics of each project. I mean, each project that then we want to work on with the council has to go through its own set of arrangements and due diligence and so forth. But at least it gets us through that first hurdle, which is that the council is able to work with Bath and West Community Energy preferentially to commercial operators where it makes sense to do so.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit about how we got that into place, but it's there now and anyone can use
Yeah.
it. So
And it's been there. That's the thing. It's 15 years old now. So like it's sort
yeah.
of been tested to destruction. It's not a thing that people go, what's this newfangled nonsense? So that's worth knowing. And I think I just want to, because I saw that there were a couple of Karen and Daya's questions that seemed very relevant to that. I want to bring you back in then, because when we spoke a few weeks ago, you said something similar. Like in the early days, we kind of avoided procurement by working. And I feel like you just touched on it there. You'd got to this strange overlap end with the end of the feed-in tariff where you found that they could continue to receive this tariff, but the council itself couldn't. Is that what allowed you to bypass procurement? Do you feel that that was just a moment in time, or?
I don't think that was the specific reason why we were able to avoid in procurement. In fact, we still do effectively, in the sense that Reading Community Energy Society is taking a lease on the roof. So essentially, it's an offer and an opportunity that we can pursue without necessarily needing to go through procurement. We're not, no, we are agreeing to buy our energy at a competitive rate, but essentially we haven't been challenged by procurement to take that through those channels as yet. So there's still, I mean, there are different roles obviously that the council plays in terms of the society. So on the one hand, we are hosting arrays on some of our roofs. So that's one particular arrangement, and we have leases with them to make sure that's all in place. And on the other side, we have an involvement with the running of the society, and we have shares in the society.
Yeah.
So we have an interest in it in that way. But in general, we are using them in preference to going to the market.
Yeah. And so that brings me on to, I was going to sort of move on to the more civic and political foundation of the relationships. And so I'll come back to you, Ben, because you've just touched on it. You mentioned that you put a councillor on the board and then another councillor joined, which I believe is the leader. Is that right? The leader of the
It
council?
is the leader now. Yeah, she wasn't
That's
then,
right.
but she is
She
now.
wasn't.
Yeah.
She's become the leader since. So,
Mm.
and do you think, like, what's your sense of how important that level of civic overlap is in terms of justifying the single or preferred supplier relationship that you have with Reading Community Energy? Do you think that that kind of political buy-in is crucial to that?
Yeah, I think it is crucial. I mean, it's quite subtle because a lot of the time it's about those kind of projects that you take forward. So a particular project might have be an opportunity, and in order to make sure that that opportunity is prioritized, you then obviously have the leader involved, and that's always helpful. Essentially, there is always lots of things going on with properties, and trying to get something through that's maybe, of relatively minor benefit relative to other priorities, like the fact that local authority buildings are requiring generally quite a lot of maintenance and quite a lot of sort of compliance measures and all sorts of different things that affect estates and assets. Having that ability to sort of say, oh yes, but this one is a good story, and the councillor, the leader of the council is involved, and everyone wants to get that, what we call a triple benefit out of it,
Yeah.
because we get the benefit of the good energy price from the solar panels. We get the benefit of the shareholders, the local ownership of the panels, and we also get the benefit of the community fund that we build up and that gets spent on community projects as well. So we get a sort of triple layer of benefit that comes through with the community energy projects.
And Sarah, I think you touched on this already, but I just want to sort of draw it out a little bit more. Your commitment within the original cooperation agreement between the council and Bath and West Community Energy sort of even grew beyond that, because I believe the council provided some of the debt funding for some of the early Bath and West projects. And it's just because you've been on both sides of it and you've probably heard different stories of the history of how it started. When you were in the council, you saw all the hard work that the council had to do to make this happen. And then probably you went into Bath and West Community Energy and heard them talk about how hard it was to get the council to make this happen. And you were like, oh, it was loads of effort, actually. Thanks very much. I might be just putting words in your mouth there, but how much of it came down to politics in the council, that you had to have a political champion, and how much of it was officers in the council just showing the political group that it was okay, that it was safe, that it was acceptable, that it aligned with policies or even with ideologies? Where was that balance between the political and the officer level?
Yeah, so I think it is usually the case. Yeah, so no politicians in my experience have come into their roles knowing anything about community energy. I don't think anyone generally does know about community energy. I think we assume no one knows anything. It's the starting point.
It's a good starting point.
Because it's a strange thing. We are very, very different from the usual way of doing business, aren't we? And in many ways, we're cooperative. We've got an asset lock. We're not commercial. We have local members. There's lots of things that are a very different way of doing business that sits right outside people's frames of reference. So it takes a very long time to, well, not very, the first step, I suppose, and it can take a long time depending on how receptive they are, is just to make the case that this is a worthwhile thing to be supporting. And so, yes, that's essential. So that is the hard work that, because always you're going to come back to this question of, okay, well, we could put solar on to these roofs ourselves and maybe get a revenue, or we could give it over to these people who will keep the revenue in the community, but that means us not having it.
Yeah,
I think that's the bridge you have to cross. Is for them is to align. And as Ben has said, there's loads of reasons why the council should do that to meet their policy aims and others. But that has to be the case. And we saw this cooperation through successive administrations. So we had Bath and North East Somerset flip-flops between Lib Dem and Conservative, and they have very different political drivers. And so we have to match up the benefits and sell community energy to the respective driver set of each administration. So what we tended to find was that, yes, we had to kind of win the argument at the political level and get some enthusiasm there, because then that's essential. And then as officers, you do need that support from an officer champion as well, which my manager and myself sort of fulfilled that role. And then from that position, then you can approach the middle of the organisation, the people whose day job it isn't to work with community energy groups, and that is the set of the cast of services that you've described, so legal, procurement, finance. You need the political mandate, and you sort of need that champion really before you can then approach that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
no, I think it does. You need everything in the mix, but actually it's unlikely potentially that it's a politician that's going to come and drive it. So you just need to make it work for them and align with their beliefs as well. So because I can see the questions going up, and some of them I knew people would ask that. So I wanted to come on to this idea of different models of, I think two classic examples, although they're not in England. So I always think how Edinburgh and Glasgow City Council went about their community energy stuff is really, well, it's both classically Edinburgh and Glasgow, but also their nice contrast. So what Glasgow did was went out and they parcelled up a bunch of derelict sites and random bits of Glasgow that nobody wanted to build on, that the council owned and couldn't use. So not really roofs, actually, mostly ground mounted. And they parcelled those up and did some basic kind of site assessments on them and put that out effectively to a tender, which said groups that meet these descriptions, that the description is effectively an asset locked community benefit society, can bid for these sites and to put solar on them. And then what Edinburgh did was completely different, which was that a particular councillor already knew of a community energy organisation and approached them and said, do you want 24 schools? Can we do a thing? So it feels a bit more like the Bath and West arrangement or the Reading one, where it's more one-to-one. And I think that you've obviously shown, as have Edinburgh, that that's doable and achievable. But with the new funding that will come out of the Great British Energy Local Power Plan, do you feel that approach, that sort of more Edinburgh, Bath, Reading approach, is still viable? And I think some of the concerns coming up in the questions suggest that this single group relationship might be harder to defend going forward in an environment with more funding flowing down the line. So I'll go to Ben first, I think, on that, and then maybe I'll come back to you, Sarah, to ask you a bit about Keynsham community energy and how that overlaps. So Ben, what's your view on, for a council starting from scratch now, the kind of Glasgow versus the Edinburgh model?
Yeah, I think the likelihood is that it will become more difficult and we will be challenged a bit more. It depends, I suppose, on how broad the definition of community energy becomes. But in terms of the Reading landscape, obviously we are sort of one excuse me, we're one sort of unitary authority, so there's not
Yeah.
that many groups to choose from, and most people involved in one group are also involved in one of the other groups somehow or other, and so they kind of organise themselves quite well. So I think that makes things easier for us in that sense. But equally, yeah, I think we could be open to challenge on it. And going forward, I think when there is more money available and more support available, depending on the extent to which that can flow to the different community energy groups, whether I don't know how much is going to actually come through the pipe in terms of development funding versus actual capital support or whatever. But ultimately, I think they're probably going to be reasonably polite to one another in the Reading area rather than some other perhaps areas where there's just more groups looking at wider geography. But yeah, I think it will become more challenging.
It will. And Sarah, when you were still at the council, I think was when a similar cooperation agreement with Keynsham Community Energy was signed. Is that right? Can you sort of give us a bit of background about how that worked, where you had two organisations with the same agreements working in roughly the same area?
Yes, and I think it is, to Ben's point, we are in a very small unitary authority, each of us. So it makes it a lot easier for us than, say, Wiltshire or Somerset. We've got a massive area, Cornwall, with community energy groups at different levels of maturity, covering different areas. And the challenge there needs to be, okay, how can we create a framework that enables all these groups to participate in their own areas? But there needs to be some level of capacity building at that, some networking capacity building to support those groups to come forward. I mean, with us at Keynsham, much as Ben has said, we all know Keynsham Community Energy really well. Bath and West Community Energy has very much been supporting Keynsham Community Energy because they're voluntary led. They've been trying to get this one scheme on the Council Leisure Centre over the line for as long as I can remember. Maybe at some point it will happen. And I think it's looking good actually now, but we've been very much supporting them. I think for us, the ideal thing would be as hyper-local as possible when it comes to community energy, even at the expense potentially of Bath and West Community Energy's own scalability. So, and I think this is one of the lovely things about community energy is, and I don't think any community energy cooperative out there is trying to sort of take over the world. We've got a little patch that we want to work in. We want to work really deeply with the people there. We want to get as much local involvement in the energy transition, and the more hyper-local it is, the more our ability is to work through the local networks and relationships to be able to get that. I mean, get that strategic benefit that I think councils who are truly committed to tackling the climate crisis really see is that one of the big challenges with scaling up renewables is community consent. And the hyper-local groups are surely best placed to secure that. So the way that Bath and West Community Energy likes to work really with other groups, either on our patch or we even sometimes support groups outside of our patch, like Zero North Wilts, is that we can perform a bit of an incubating role. So there's different ways, and there's different organisations that can do this too. So for example, we might develop a scheme on a school, and we do that with our own delivery mechanisms and fundraising. And then the community group would buy us out. The less established community group will buy us out, and then they get when they're ready by doing their own community energy fundraise, and that de-risks it for them. They're already buying into an existing scheme. Much shared ownership projects can work very well in this way as well, and they do it in their own good time. And then they start at the point they own it. They can start taking the revenues from that scheme and start building up their own capacity. I think it is quite tricky with voluntary groups. There always is this inherent difficulty when it's reliant on volunteers. So I think for us, there's something around having a degree of professionalisation, whether that's in the community group itself or whether they're part of a larger network that can provide that, or like an Energy for All, as Ben mentioned, just to enable them to have that stability, provide that stability so that they can be a reliable partner for the council and be voluntary, or for them to scale up through enabling them to get more and more schemes so they can start to hire a staff as Reading Community Energy and BWC have done. So I think I don't think there's any inherent reason why having more community energy cooperatives in an area all coming forward to the council needs to be a problem. In fact, it's actually great. But you do need that extra support to make sure that the new ones and the ones who are run by volunteers are able to actually participate. I think GB Energy is looking very much at that question.
And that support has existed for a while, as you know, we've worked together over many years. in all the work I've done, you know, for those people asking in the questions, oh, well, what if there's more than one group? I've come across this endlessly, and it is a bizarrely accommodating kind of sector in a way where it just sort of carves it up in between itself, and with these layers of support, as Sarah just described, around a more experienced group will mentor or support a less experienced group, and that is not uncommon. So it's kind of understanding that culture is actually part of building and de-risking the relationship, not treating it like a standard commercial rivalry, which might be more would be worried about receiving challenge on. And also, I think that kind of brings us to just quickly wrapping up really on my last question, which is, in a way, for Bath and again for Reading, by providing that early support and the early sites through the cooperation agreement and so on, you kind of gave, when you were at the council, Sarah, you gave Bath and West Community Energy access to some sites, which then help build their resilience and their financial base. But you get to a point where council runs out of roofs or runs out of land, and so you know you've renewed your cooperation agreement, you've given over quite a lot of schools and so on. Do you think it just comes to a natural end at some point, that this relationship with councils and community energy just outgrows the council eventually, or does it evolve into something new? I think you maybe touched on it a bit earlier, talking about your heritage project.
Yes, I think there's just so, I think the council and community energy are perfect delivery partners. I mean, we're aligned in the goals for a start, which isn't, you aren't always, and sorry, anyone in the room we might disagree with, but more than, it's in our DNA in the way we're structured, much more than it is for commercial organisations. You know, we want the same things as the council does. We want a just transition, a fair transition, one that keeps benefit locally in the pockets of local people, not going off to external shareholders. So, and there's so many ways community energy can work with the councils that I don't see us ever really growing out of that, I think. And that's really recognised in the local power plan when they're saying they're going to be funding council joint ventures, you know, with council and community energy. So once the councils, yes, amazing if the council could run out of school roofs, having given them over to community energy, and set up a really strong community energy network in their area, where there's this constant stream of income flowing into these community energy cooperatives that's going to keep work on net zero going regardless of what political landscape we're in. I mean, that's an amazing position to be in, just from having all those rooftops given over. But then let's look at other land. You know, let's look at the council and community energy buying in together to a shared ownership scheme where there's good, you know, good investments, sound investments from a Section 151 perspective to be made into these large commercial schemes that then makes them, well, if we could have a little bit higher level of public consent, but also get some of that benefit to go into the community instead of going off to shareholders. Yeah. So yeah, there's loads of ways we can carry on working together. Home energy, retrofit, all of those things. Biodiversity net gain, nature,
build the base through the kind of solar start that you had. And is it the same for you, Ben, that you feel you're running out of roof, as it were, to offer the Community Energy Society?
Yeah, I think we arrived there quite a while ago, actually. The bus depot is actually an arm's length company from the council. So that was a bit of a different case. But so it's nice that we've been able to find that one. But I think for the most part, we're pretty much out of roofs. We don't have very many we can put solar panels on ourselves either. So we that part of things has probably moved on already for our CES. But I think, as Sarah says, the relationship will stay on account of the fact that, you know, we just have a real big interest in trying to achieve the same goals that RCS are trying to achieve. And there's a lot more interest as well within the community energy sector. I mean, I know you, Rachel, have been along to some of our workshops and things that have been able to, you've been able to see what's happening in some of the other groups like Reading Hydro as well, where there's a real interest in working, building up community awareness of renewables. Excuse me, and that side of it is really important for us. And I think one of the untapped ones also is probably our own housing. So, you know, we've done a whole load on our housing, but it's only a small proportion of our housing stock. And when we started out, we were kind of looking for all the south-facing roofs. Well, actually, we now know that anything that doesn't face north is probably fine. Mm-hmm. So there's lots and lots more roofs we can do, but we've never got to the point, and we've got a couple of difficult aspects there. One is that we already gave free electricity to all the tenants that we put solar panels on. So to then to charge tenants in the future to make a sustainable model would be really difficult. And there are all sorts of challenges like that. So I think that is one of the ones that, coming from the council, I'd love to see. I'd love to see it like community energy really reaching to individual households and being able to kind of help people have solar when they can't afford the capital themselves. That would be a real benefit. But yeah, we'll see what it is.
So for anyone who's interested in the solar on your houses, I definitely recommend Googling Energize Barnsley to find a really, really excellent example of how that's been done. So we've only got a few minutes left, and I did sort of touch on some of the questions that were floating up by me as we went. But Kirsty, do you want to, or Asma, whoever's watching it, do you want to step in with just one or two of the ones that have got the most upvote or that you think is probably most broadly relevant?
Yeah. There are some excellent technical questions, by the way, so I feel like we might need to have another event.
Yeah, we will send a follow-up round to the attendees.
Yeah.
To everything. Yeah.
And maybe these are things that actually need discussion with the people in the legal department, for example.
Yeah.
So a very popular question was identifying sites to host the renewables is a major step. And so how significant is the role of the properties team, or I presume they're also called estates? Callum says he's found it challenging in the past to convince allowing access to the roof space due to the complications with insurance, ability to service the roofs, danger to building structure. So what options are available where property services teams are not on board, and what are the best channels to use?
Get a politician to sit on them from on high. Sarah? And then Ben?
And I think Ben would be good to speak to this as well. Because it's amazing, isn't it, that your property team just handed over all those roofs? How did you? Yeah, so I'll ask that to Ben first, actually.
Yeah, so a long time ago, but I think broadly the roofs presented themselves. We'd been through all our roofs anyway as part of our major solar program before, so we knew what was left over. In terms of, I think you're right, Rachel. I think the fact that the politicians were involved was important. The deputy leader at the time, when I took the prospect to him, one of the briefings early days, he was the one really who said, right, the council needs to be getting involved here and putting some councillors on the board, and we need to. He was trying to get me to go on the board. I didn't want to go on the board, but he's basically trying to establish a close connection between us. So I think because also those circumstances, the fact that it made such sense for us to access that lower cost energy through the feed-in tariffs that were still available to the society. So because that opportunity was there, it got us over a hump possibly in terms of the start point. But I think that it's worth bearing in mind that community energy groups do offer really good value propositions. Like you can get much cheaper long-term fixed energy prices off them. So I think the corporate case needs to be made. Like this is an opportunity which we wouldn't have if we didn't go down this route.
And also that those questions, what if we need access to the roof? What about fire? What about this? You would ask those anyway if you were putting solar on your own roof. If you
absolutely, it's all part of the process, isn't it, of developing a project? And I think ultimately the complications around insurance stuff, they're all surmountable. I mean, in our case, it was the case that the council were self-insuring up to £50,000 anyway, because that's kind of our excess. So most of the arrays are coming in under that. So it's kind of just being sensible and pragmatic about a lot of those things, picking through all the issues. The company that will come and install the solar is obviously MCS accredited. They do their RAMs and they do all their health and safety. So once you get to the point of putting people on roofs to do the work, then you've got.
And that's actually a really good distinction that needs making, because I have had politicians say to me, I don't want a bunch of volunteers putting solar on my roof, and I've had to go, it's literally not them that they would commission in the same way that you would a qualified MCS certified installer. It would be a third party who is fully qualified to do the work, because I think sometimes there is literally a perception that a bunch of volunteers will turn up with wire in bags and
a noted caution on that is that volunteers may just try and help out by going and cleaning some leaves off or something like that with a ladder. So you need to be having a close conversation with your community energy colleagues to make sure that you've got they've got what's needed to be able to do.
I do have a tiny suggestion on this, because I went around the houses on this. I mean, those questions, oh boy, I mean, I thought I was going to go lose the plot answering those questions for the billionth time with estates.
Yeah.
I think we did, obviously, but yeah, they do come up, and they come up again and again and again and again and again. And I wonder whether there is some merit just in this breadth of support that's being offered now, of having champion estate people speaking to colleagues.
Yeah.
Because I think there is, where, you know, you talk about this kind of cultural worlds colliding. It's most acute where you've got professional specialisms that are very much risk oriented, and they really won't hear it from you as a community energy cooperative because you just aren't within their frame. So if there are councils, you know, I would volunteer, suggest maybe Bath and North East Somerset, but anyone else who's got estates teams who are on board with this and they've been through the process and they get it and they're enthusiastic, they're best placed probably to speak to, hold a webinar and get the estates guys on it.
Well, that is a very useful place to finish. So I want to say thank you so much for Ben and Sarah. I know that in some ways is much more stressful than giving a presentation because you're sort of reacting in the moment more than you would otherwise. But that to me it's more alive, and you get a bit more into the nitty-gritty, and it stimulates more questions. To all of those of you who've come along, thank you very much. We will see some of you again at 2 o'clock. And we will look through the question list and find a way of responding to them so that we can send out a sort of briefing in a couple of weeks with those questions that haven't been answered today. But I hope you found that useful, and see you again in an hour if you're coming back.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Ben. Amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the questions.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Ben.
See you again later, some of you.